like, you know, I just joke, and I always tell my kids, you think I'm Jesus Rockefeller over here, right? Hippie Jesus Rockefeller, meaning I'm completely peaceful. I'm a total hippie. Just love, man. And by the way, here's $1,000. That's who my kids wish I was, right? That's sort of who Christians wish Jesus was. But surprise, surprise, Jesus is the son of David.
Knock, knock.
He carries David. Okay? David walking into a church today would not be welcome. Okay? Don't tell me Jesus is a hippie if Jesus is the badass son of David and you think he's a hippie? No.
I need to start. They ain't held it on, boys. We're back on this one. We'll start that again.
No. Jesus is a badass. He has a sense of humor. I call him the chain yanking Messiah because boy, does he yank the chain of the priesthood and the Babylonian infrastructure. And you've got all these guys with their big fluffy beards walking around all serious, and they're like, Shabbat Shalom, Yeshua this, Yeshua that. And they get very, very serious about Jesus. And yes, I'm not saying don't take Jesus seriously. You absolutely should. Don't hear me wrong. But Jesus trolled the out of the priesthood, and people don't know him, so they miss it. They're supporting Jesus and supporting the priesthood all at the same time, and you can't do it. And I'm going to show you that a little bit today, and I think it's funny. I think Jesus is fantastic. He just yanks their chain. It doesn't stop. Dude, if Jesus was in Babylonian priesthood school, he would be in school suspension all the time. Okay. He would not be in the front row kissing the teacher's ass. Okay, that's not him. And I hope you see a little bit of his brilliance, his giant set of balls, his masculine energy, and the way he just trolls them. It's brilliant, and people miss it. Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love to all those in this session. All of those who are listening. Don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing. Okay. We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
Welcome back. Let's see. Welcome back. All right. Luke 5, a deeper dive, our cast of characters agenda. During our gospel of repentance, calling the apostles out of Babylon and back to the covenant. And I think it's really neat to think of the apostles this way, because if each of them are representing the different tribes, right, it sort of gives you insight when you know the Old Testament a little better. In Genesis 49 is just one example, right, that we've read carefully. So we're kind of referring to that, but it's in many more places where you can understand the personalities and the challenges that they're each overcoming in order to move into covenant. Does that make sense? So if they're representing the 12 tribes, well, you've got, the glamorized priesthood that they've got to get over if they're from the tribe of Levi and how to operate outside of the Babylonian priesthood. If they're from Judah, they've got to overcome the scepter of Babylon. If they're from Gad, they've got to calm down a little bit because they're a little too warrior-like. Am I making sense? Do you see? And it gives you an insight into, the weaknesses and the challenges that it takes for people to come out of Babylon and start to do things in a different way. So there you go. We haven't gotten to Moses. Moses, what's the gift of the temple? We're going to do that right now. When did the power of God come upon him? Well, clearly that was the baptism. We did that all the way back in Luke. So if we think of the power of God, the full power, the full logos coming upon Jesus at the baptism, then the ministry starts and he calls the apostles. And we know from over in John that Andrew was there at the baptism. So these guys are around. In Acts, it doesn't say a requirement for the apostles is that they attended the baptism of Jesus. It says they were there from the beginning. And the beginning of his ministry was the baptism. So right at the beginning, right at the baptism or shortly thereafter when he begins his ministry and begins to call the apostles. They had to be around then. And we know blatantly that Andrew was there, and he was the very first to meet Jesus. So these guys were there from the beginning. When the power of God first came, or not first came, but, fully came, on that this day I have begotten you at the baptism, and then his ministry begins. So all of that goes together, and the calling of the apostles to reunite the house comes directly after. How and why did he forgive sins? We're going to talk about that today. What does he mean by faith? That's an easy one. We're going to hit that today. Wineskin's parable, a little more in depth. And I think we're ready to go and knock this out. Let's see how far we get today. I think we'll finish it out today, I hope. Wouldn't that be great? Just 2, and then you can get on to Luke 6. All right, the first thing we're going to do is do a very, very quick hit on the fishing audit, because every single preacher out there loves to talk about you're going to be fishers of men, and they're focusing on the fish, right? And that's good. We want to focus on fish. Catching fish is good. But we're not ever focusing on the boat. They caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. They filled both boats so full that the boats began to sink. Well, we know that fish are the souls. It's also a provision, registry assets. If you're thinking of a war, right? He's got assets deployed. But then we have a sinking boat, and no one talks about this metaphor. This is your infrastructure breach. This is your corrupted system. It can't contain the override harvest. The system is going to sink when you step in to the Davidic covenant. The system, the priesthood, can't hold you any longer, and it's going to implode. And we're going to see Jesus do that all the way through Luke 5, because he trolls the priesthood so hard, and so many people miss it. It's fantastic. I love it. You have to remember, Jesus isn't the son of, like, I just joke, and I always tell my kids, you think I'm Jesus Rockefeller over here, right? Hippie Jesus Rockefeller, meaning I'm completely peaceful. I'm a total hippie. Just love, man. And by the way, here's $1,000. That's who my kids wish I was, right? That's sort of who Christians wish Jesus was. But surprise, surprise, Jesus is the son of David.
Knock, knock.
He carries David, okay? David walking into a church today would not be welcome, okay? Don't tell me Jesus is a hippie if Jesus is the badass son of David and you think he's a hippie? No.
I need to start. They ain't held it on, boys. We're back on this one. We'll start that again.
No. Jesus is a badass. He has a sense of humor. I call him the chain yanking Messiah, because boy, does he yank the chain of the priesthood and the Babylonian infrastructure. And you've got all these guys with their big fluffy beards walking around all serious, and they're like, Shabbat Shalom, Yeshua this, Yeshua that. And they get very, very serious about Jesus. And yes, I'm not saying don't take Jesus seriously. You absolutely should. Don't hear me wrong. But Jesus trolled the out of the priesthood, and people don't know him, so they miss it. They're supporting Jesus and supporting the priesthood all at the same time, and you can't do it. And I'm going to show you that a little bit today. And I think it's funny. I think Jesus is fantastic. He just yanks their chain It doesn't stop. Dude, if Jesus Jesus was in Babylonian priesthood school, he would be in school suspension all the time. Okay. He would not be in the front row kissing the teacher's ass. Okay, that's not him. And I hope you see a little bit of his brilliance, his giant set of balls, his masculine energy, and the way he just trolls them. It's brilliant, and people miss it. So that's what we're doing today. All right, let's go. Because the boat is not the boat is not going to handle this harvest, let me tell you. The system can't contain. So I'm just going to give you the answer to the quiz before we start the quiz. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer to the quiz before we even start the content here. We're gonna start at the end, and here's a summary statement for you to keep in mind as we go through Luke 5 and what happened here in sequence. But Jesus sends the healed leper to the Levitical priesthood with a gift. Not because cleansing is needed. He's already clean. But he's forcing them into the Levitical protocol, but they can't complete it because he's not sick. So the man's already clean. So the priest is going to be stuck. He either has to declare a miracle or reject the ritual law that they wrote themselves because they can't do the ritual. It's not Jesus conforming to the system. He's put them in a trap and nobody sees it because they don't understand Leviticus. Let's break that down, and I'm going to show you how he did that. Let's go. So what he's actually doing, he doesn't just troll the priesthood, you guys. He literally detonates their entire authority immediately. And he's doing it by sending a healed leper into a Levitical ritual protocol with 57 steps. But that Levitical protocol no longer applies. So he's forcing the priesthood elites to either validate Jesus's cleansing, which is the Davidic override, or violate quote unquote Moses law that they wrote themselves, their own Moses said so laws. Okay. The priesthood saying healing needs this very complicated sacrificial blood ritual. But Jesus says, I'm sorry, guys, healing just walked in. What are you going to do now? It's a trap and nobody sees them. They're like, oh, Jesus is working with the priesthood. The guy had to bring a gift. No, that's not what's going on here. Watch. In Luke 5, we have two cases, okay, of Jesus healing. The first case is the leper, that Jesus has that really intense compassion and humanity. He reaches out and touches him. And when he touches him, he heals him instantly. There's no sacrifice. There's no ritual. He just says, be clean. That is kingdom covenant override right there. Davidic covenant authority. Not ritual. Not sacrifice. Then he's a completely healed man. And he sends them to the priests with a gift. Now, if you understand Leviticus, he didn't send him to the priests with the birds and the protocol. He only sent him with the gift portion of like a 15-step outline. So like you have to understand the healing part of Leviticus. The priests have to do this giant 8-day ritual and have to have all this shit. Jesus skipped all that and goes, just bring him the gift. What is the gift part of the Levitical protocol? It's flour and oil so they can make bread. right? Jesus, the bread, Bethlehem, house of bread, the manna, eat from my bread, the bread thing. Go all the way back to our Paul series when we talked about the leaven and the bread. He sent him with bread. It's fantastic. Jesus didn't give him a diagnosis. He didn't give him a ritual. There was no sin offering. There's no guilt offering, which are written into this big Levitical thing that takes 8 days. He did none of that. He just said, here, bring him some bread. Tell him I sent you. It's fantastic. Let's see what they do.
I said, knock, knock.
So your Levitical priesthood are forced into a quote unquote Moses said so trap. Because if Moses really wrote the laws of the 8-day complex Levitical ritual, they can't complete the ritual because he's already clean. See it? So that's his system detonation number 1. Their rituals bypassed because healing walked in the door without their rituals and just says, hey guys, I'm healed. You want to examine me? They can't do their ritual. So they either say, oh my gosh, it's a miracle and attribute that to Davidic covenant authority, or they refuse it and break the law of Moses, quote unquote, that Moses said so. You have to do it this way. So like they're stuck. He just trolled them massively. And it's like, by the way, want some bread? Like that's what he did. It's fantastic. People miss it because they don't understand. So let's understand. All right. In Luke 5:14 versus Leviticus 14 is where you're going to see this ritual. Let's do a quick audit here. Jesus says in Luke 5, go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Not as an offering, as a testimony to them. So he's not sending him in to do a Levitical ritual. He's sending the gift portion of a long list of shit. So he just said, just bring the gift that quote unquote Moses commanded and do it as a testimony of your healing. But he doesn't say, go see the priest to be cleansed. He says, as a testimony that you already are cleansed. See what they say. The man's already healed. So he doesn't need to go to the Levitical priest for a diagnosis or ritual. He's already done. He's already clean. So what this is doing is forcing the priesthood into a catch-22. They either accept the healing and perform the gift part and accept the gift, saying, yay, he's healed, which is basically declaring a miracle because they didn't do it, or deny the man is healed, reject the gift, and completely violate the quote unquote Moses said so law. They can't do either one. It's fantastic and it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Nobody gets it. So, what is this Levitical ritual? Well, in Leviticus 14, the priesthood full ritual. On day 1, you've got to bring 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and some hyssop. And then you go all the way through. And by day 8, you've got 2 male lambs, 1 female lamb. You have to bring a sin offering, a guilt offering, a burnt offering, and then finally the gift offering, which is the grain, which is fine flour mixed with oil. So all of this assumes that the man is unclean and needs to be declared clean. Okay, that's the process of a ritual cleansing by the priesthood. So what the priest would expect is on day 1, outside the camp, the priest has to come out and examine the leper. If he's healed, okay, if he's healed, he's going to bring 2 live, clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. One bird is killed over running water, and the other is dipped and released. Now, on day 7 to 8, inside the camp, the man has to shave the entire body, bring 2 males, 1 female, fine flour and oil, and these represent a guilt offering, sin offering, burnt offering, and a wave offering. But Jesus skips all of that. He just says, bring the gift. No diagnosis, no waiting, no examination, no lambs, no ritual, nothing, no scarlet yarn. He's like, there, go to the priest and give him some bread. That's what he did. See what they say. Jesus is making an announcement, and he's like trolling them so hard, and people don't see it. I think it's funny. I think it's hilarious. I love Jesus so much. He just says, offer the gift, quote unquote, Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. To them. I just overrode their entire 8-day ritual, skipped the sacrifice of like 6 animals in all the glamour, and just sent him in with some bread and said, hi guys, I'm healed, and the Jesus guy told me to bring you some bread. That's what he just did. He didn't diagnose him. No mention of cleansing, rituals, no guilt, no sin mention. Jesus didn't say, go and thank them for your sin or your guilt, or just the gift, which is bread. It's fantastic. All the way down to the bottom. They're stuck. They either have to admit that the ritual is baloney. Moses didn't say so, and it's a miracle by Jesus, or what are they going to do? Examine him? So he's not just trolling the priesthood. He's setting the guy in with bread, ingredients, to detonate all of their corrupt, glamored authority by sending a fully healed man with no talk of sin or guilt into a Levitical protocol that no longer applies, if it ever did apply to begin with. He is forcing the priesthood to validate the override and say, oh my gosh, the authority of the kingdom of David is real, or violate Moses. Because the priesthood says healing needs ritual. But the covenant says healing already walked in. So what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Not just ignore him and reject the gift and say he's not clean? You can't do that. So the man's already clean. There's an override and no need for a sin or a guilt offering. There's no need for birds or blood. Just flour and oil. All you need to have bread. He walks in with the registry override in hand. The priests are expecting a big ritual, and he brings them bread, and they flip their shit. They can't reject the gift, but they can't perform the ritual. So if they can't perform the ritual on a leper, they're violating Moses. If they reject the gift and don't do it, they're violating Moses. Or they can acknowledge the miracle healing. They're stuck. It's a catch-22. Jesus is so sassy. So this was his calling card. This was the knock, 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 knock. Here we are. What are you going to do? That's Jesus's knock, knock moment to the priesthood, and it's fantastic. So why he's so brilliant. I love him so much. The priests are expecting a full diagnosis, but he's already clean. They're expecting to perform all these ritual steps. Jesus skips them all. They expect control. Jesus hands them a miracle that they didn't authorize, so they can validate the healing and acknowledge Jesus's authority under covenant in the kingdom of David, or deny it. Deny the healing and violate the entire Moses ritual. Either way, they're completely exposed. And the gift is a trap. They can just go through and perform the ritual on a clean man if that's their choice, or acknowledge that it doesn't matter, that they're full of shit. So he didn't just heal the leper. He weaponized their janky Levitical law that they wrote in and said Moses said so. And he sent a tactical payload holding bread straight to the priesthood's protocol stack. It's freaking fantastic. He bypassed the entire 8-day ritual, skipped the birds, skipped the blood, skipped the shaving, skipped any mention of guilt offering, and just says, go show yourself to the priests. Offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So the translation of that is, let's see what they do with their ritual, their quote unquote Moses said so ritual. Let's see what they do with that when the healing is already done. Let's see if they acknowledge the authority of the Davidic covenant. And let's see if they accept the bread, the gift of the bread. I'll give you a clue. They didn't. They didn't. They didn't. So that's our first case. But then he keeps going. He's already detonated the fogback priesthood using their own laws. Okay. He sends a healed man into a ritual that they can't complete, but with a gift they can't reject and a testimony they can't explain. The priesthood says the ritual is required, but Jesus' covenant says healing already walked in. And the ever holy priesthood flips their ever loving shit. He just threw down the gauntlet in such a great way. But he's not done. My king's not done. He's David. He's Davidic king. Okay. So the next thing he says is now we have a paralytic that we're going to heal, right? Well, in this one, he just skips the priesthood entirely. If you have to bring a gift to the priesthood because you're healed, Jesus would have made this guy go to the priesthood as well with a gift, but he didn't. He never sent the paralyzed guy, once you walk, pick up your mat and walk. He didn't say, pick up your mat and walk over to the Levitical priesthood and give them the gift of the bread. So he's not adhering to the system. He did the first one as a calling card, okay? The second one, he skips the priesthood entirely. And he just says, your sins are forgiven. No offering, no temple, no ritual, no priest. This is his system detonation number 2. The sin, guilt, infirmity bypassed. Scribes and Pharisees flip their shit because he did it publicly and he did it in front of them. They're not flipping their shit because he quote unquote acted like God. That's their excuse. They're flipping their shit because he bypassed their entire authority structure that they claim is based on Moses said so. Like Moses walked off the mountain with the entire healing ritual and handed it to them personally because Moses said so. He just detonated all of that. He bypassed their entire structure of authority that they're telling people Moses said so. They had built a system, putting themselves in power, where disease equals sin, which equals guilt, which equals priestly ritual control. Jesus Wipe that all away with one sentence. Then heals the man physically after the forgiveness. So healing follows override, not ritual. Healing follows covenant forgiveness, not ritual. These men tore through the roof to reach Jesus. I want you to think about that. They weren't just believing in their hearts. They weren't just showing faith. Okay? These people had publicly aligned themselves with the Davidic covenant, bypassing Babylon's temple system. And they did it publicly. They were publicly rejecting the old wine, the old system, the entire Levitical framework that Moses said so. They bypassed the whole Levitical infrastructure to climb through a roof and align with the Davidic covenant override king. And they did it publicly, which is not just bold, it's dangerous, because the Babylonian priesthood was watching the whole time. They didn't care. They aligned with the Davidic king, not with Babylon's Levitical system. That's not faith. That's covenant alignment. That's recognizing Davidic authority when you see it. That's bigger than faith. That's bigger than believe. Believe a story. So when Jesus saw their faith, he said, friend, your sins are forgiven. Why are they forgiven? Because they just aligned with the Davidic covenant. That's why. Okay, they're in line with the king. They've aligned themselves. They had a choice. Go through your bird rituals with Babylon or align with the king. And they tore through a roof to align with the king. There was no ritual. There's no prayer circle. Jesus saw that. Covenant alignment, registry discernment, not emotional intuition, not mind reading. He's seeing that they're aligned with him. They're not just hoping. They've opted into the covenant. They've opted into the kingdom, and they've bypassed Levitical Babylon. So they're aligned with the covenant. They're aligned with the king. They've thrown out the old way. They're going with the new way. You're in covenant. Your sins are forgiven. You're following me. It's registry authority, not ritual, not hope. There was no priest, no ritual, no altar, no sacrifice. Just Davidic covenant override, activating forgiveness. Why? Because they're in the covenant. That's why. They've aligned themselves with Jesus, the Son of David. That's why. Period. Period. Jesus never says, I'm God. He says, I have authority. That's the Son of Man, Davidic covenant override. That's not claiming to be a walking deity. It's a whole different flip, guys. So faith is covenant loyalty to Jesus, not just belief in miracles. You can believe in miracles all day, but if you're not aligned with Jesus, to tear the roof off a house in front of the Babylonian priesthood, you're not aligned. You sit on the corner and hope. But you're going to go over there and tear the roof off in front of the Babylonian priesthood cartel to align yourself with the Son of David? Yeah, that's covenant loyalty. That's not just believe in your heart. They trusted Jesus as the Davidic covenant registry heir, not just a spectacle. And how does he respond? Welcome to the family. He responds with forgiveness, then healing to confirm the override. This moment is like a dimensional handshake. He detects the loyalty. That's your covenant, joining the kingdom. The forgiveness is activated for those in the kingdom, and healing confirms the override. It's not about feelings. It's about the infrastructure transfer. They've moved kingdoms. They Hebrewed over. They moved to a new kingdom with a new king. He senses their loyalty. They tore through the roof in front of the priests. He understands their loyalty, okay?
Hey, easy there, neckbeard. Holy shit, are you kidding me? Seriously? You have a neckbeard and a rat tail? I mean, I get it. The world went to hell and you stopped giving a shit. But my dude, there is a line. So how about you put your helmet back on, tuck all that shit back away, and stop being such a distraction to the rest of us?
They're in God's covenant loyalty. Then the forgiveness, then the evidence, healing. That's how it works. That's the order. That's the order in my world. That's the order personally that we went through over here. Now in Luke 5, he says, well, which is easier? To say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. When he's reading their thoughts, we talked about this. This is discernment, not magic. But he forgives without the temple, without the priests, and without sacrifice. Jesus is standing there fully alive, forgiving sins. Therefore, if you think Jesus died to forgive your sins, well, you're going to have to explain how this happened. Well, the Jews are special and they have their own secret deal. Really? No, that's not what this is. If that's the case, then you have to find evidence for me how Jesus says a special religion gets special treatment, or a special locational group, because we know Jewish location, right? If you're from a certain location, you get a special deal. Or if you have absolutely perfect genealogical bloodline DNA from 2,000 years ago, then you get a special treatment. No special treatment. Sorry, not sorry. He did it without temple, priest, or sacrifice. No blood ritual here. Well, that's because Jesus is really God. And so when God was standing on earth, he could forgive sins. But then after that, he had to die to do it. What? Jeez, can you hear yourself? It doesn't make sense. Your story is crumbling as we speak. He's forgiving sins because he has authority, because he is the king of the Davidic covenant. That's why. That's why. It's as simple as that. It's not hard. And then he heals the man to show his authority, not to reveal some divine identity. The Son of Man is the Danielic override title. Forgiveness is Davidic covenant activation, not ritual. And healing is simply evidence of registry alignment. It's not a spectacle to sell tickets like a circus. So what have we unlocked so far? Well, faith is a public covenant shift. They tore the roof out in front of the priesthood. Clearly, they've publicly aligned with Jesus. It's not some private belief in your heart. These men risked exposure, backlash, and priestly Babylonian Herod-appointed retaliation. They didn't care. They chose the Davidic covenant over Levitical compliance, and they did it publicly, and they did it in front of the priesthood. Jesus doesn't just forgive. He confirms the new covenant infrastructure. Healing is evidence. Forgiveness is activation of the registry. And boy, do we have proof of that breach in conflict. If they were aligned, the priesthood would not be in conflict with Jesus. They would be in harmony with him. They weren't. So the fact that there was a conflict with this at all proves that your Babylonian priesthood is the breach, not aligned with Jesus, son of David. So the Pauline priesthood wants you to believe that faith is personal. No, no. It's a tactical declaration of loyalty, period. And if you want loyal, go to David. It's exactly Davidic. So after we send him with the bread, the second guy is the tactical prototype of the entire Davidic override system. He forgives sins without Levitical infrastructure and proves registry authority of the covenant through healing. But the original logic was that sin is a covenant breach. Okay. In prophetic text, sin is the breaking of covenant terms. Sin is not just doing bad things, it's violating loyalty and relational infrastructure within the covenant. So, examples of this are idolatry, injustice, impurity, but forgiveness requires a restoration back to the covenant, not a list of moral improvements. That's what we're dealing with here, not perfection. But the priesthood changed it, and they made sin about a personal moral failure. Your post-exile priesthood and later church systems, well, to keep control, they had to reframe sin as behavioral imperfection. And that perfection is outlined by whatever they want it to be. Thought crimes, emotional impurity. By doing all of this, well, it allows them to control forgiveness through rituals and confession booths. It allows them to gatekeep spiritual access via clergy and sacraments in a list of behaviors so intense that you can't possibly do it. So you feel like shit, you give up, and you throw it all on Jesus. They would sell compliance instead of offering covenant clarity. But the priesthood says sin is about being good enough. No. The Davidic covenant says sin is about alignment versus breach. That's what it is. Doesn't mean you can't morally improve. Please, yes, there's a lot of room for moral improvement. But it's about covenant, not a list of behaviors your priest handed out. Or nosy Betty in the first row. You swear too much. That's not what sin is. So sin was never about moral perfection. It's about covenant loyalty versus covenant breach. And the systems reframed it to protect their own infrastructure so they could dole out forgiveness based on what they think it should be. Well, Jesus bypassed all of that, and he just offered override with a covenant. The priesthood fog says you're not good enough. The registry says you're either aligned or not. And Shiloh's still going. Jesus didn't claim to be God in Luke 5. He claimed his authority. He's literally said, the Son of Man has authority. That's a Daniel override, not divine identity. He forgives sins as a Davidic heir, not as a temple priest. The accusation of blasphemy, guys, that's blather and strategic deceit on like, what are the priests going to say? What are they going to say? What are they really going to say? Of course they have to say blasphemy. They've got to protect their infrastructure. It's not based on truth. It's based on their fear of being bypassed. What do you think would happen if I walked into a Catholic church and started healing everybody and forgiving everybody? Davidic covenant, here, you're healed, there you go, migraine's gone. They would call me Satan, dude. Right, wouldn't they? You can't do that. You're not good enough to do. Only the priests can do that. That's what they're going to say. They're going to call me a heretic. They're going to say I'm blaspheming. You think the Christians are going to accept this? Never. The priest is telling you Jesus was claiming his divinity. No, he was activating Davidic override in a badass way, too. The temple, I think of it as magic booth logic, and I mean magic booth like the confessional booth. The Levitical system is just like the Catholic system. Not literally, but metaphorically. It's tightly controlled forgiveness protocol. Only specially authorized priests could mediate sin remission. It required blood, sacrificial altar, and super secret VIP temple access. Forgiveness was a transaction, not a relational covenant. But Jesus forgives them directly. There's no priest, no altar, no sacrifice, no ritual, no temple. He's acting in registry covenant authority, not ritual compliance. So this is the equivalent of Jesus walking into the Catholic magic booth and declaring it obsolete. That's what he just did. Okay. So to the priesthood, this is sabotage. But they couldn't just scream in front of the crowd, "You're bypassing us. You're tearing down our infrastructure. How are we going to eat?" They can't say that. "Where are we going to get our meat? How are we going to sell lambs in the courtyard?" Like, they can't say that. So they accuse them of blasphemy. It's a corrupted charge to protect their cartel. That's what it was. Because Jesus just detonated their system twice in a row. So the first thing he did was he healed the leper. And we know that was a Levitical trap. And then he offered them bread. The second one, he showed with the paralytic, it was a covenant override. He didn't just heal. He exposed the priesthood's logic publicly and showed that disease was never about sin. It was about dimensional breach. And forgiveness wasn't about a ritual. It was about registry authority and alignment. And as bad as that is, my king is Davidic. He isn't done yet.
Now, where the hell was I? Oh, right. Knock, knock. Who's there? Butter. Butter who? Well, you better get out your umbrellas, because it is about to goddamn rain.
He's Davidic. Right after all of this, he went out. After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth and said, "Follow me." So, of course, he's likely a Levite by lineage, but he's not priesthood. He's working for Rome collecting taxes, which is the opposite of good, compliant Levite temple service. But Jesus doesn't rebuke him. He calls him. No ritual, no cleansing, no sacrifice, just, "Hey, Levite, come follow me," in front of the Levite priesthood. So he adds insult to injury. So in front of the Levite priesthood, he calls an outcast Levite to follow him. He's like, "You know what? Forget the priesthood. I'm taking that guy."
And I am just a monk man. I'm glad to.
Come on with me. He chooses the worst possible Levite in their eyes, in the priesthood's eyes, and says, I'll take this guy. Like they're on the dodgeball field siding up, and Jesus just trolls the priesthood and grabs the tax collector Levite to work with him after he detonates all of their entire infrastructure. And then after that, just in case you're confused about what he just did in front of everybody, he says, no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, just like the fish burst the boat. Old wineskins are your compromised priesthood religious systems. Not just, oh, that's an old way of doing things. It's the Babylonian priesthood. It's bullshit glamour genealogies and fogged back rituals. These are brittle, inflexible, and already corrupted. The new wine is a Shiloh override, registry seeded from Davidic covenant. It carries dimensional authority, not ritual compliance. It cannot be contained by priesthood infrastructure. Trying to pour Shiloh into Babylon's wineskin is absolute dimensional rupture.
Now, I don't know if any of you have checked tonight's forecast, but if I see even one mole hair on one of your ugly ass faces, it won't be just a rainstorm. Hell, it won't be a thunderstorm. It'll be a goddamn hurricane.
Sort of like when the SWAT team of David shows up and those astral kingdoms just collapse on contact. Jesus just collapsed their infrastructure publicly in front of them and trolled them by sending Brad and choosing a tax collector from the Levite lineage as his apostle, all right in a row. And there is not a preacher in a Christian church teaching that ever. Because Jesus is Jewish. So Jesus just healed a leper and sent him into a Levitical trap with the bread, right? Didn't send him to the trap, but trapped the priesthood said, bring him some bread. He forgave a paralytic and bypassed the priesthood entirely the second time. Then he called Levi, an outsider, into registry alignment. This is a triple detonation of all of their authority. The priests can't complete the ritual. They can't explain the forgiveness. And now a Levite tax collector is walking in authority that they don't have. The priest is going to say Levi's unclean and compromised. But Jesus says, no, Levi's called and empowered and in the overrid covenant. Oh my gosh. So the old wine is Babylon's infrastructure, glamored as Judah. The new wine is Shiloh's override, seeded from Ephrath. And you can't pour registry fire into a fog-back shell. The fog wants continuity, but the registry says it's gonna fall apart and rupture. So Jesus doesn't just teach. He audits the entire infrastructure. He detonates Levitical rituals and then hands them bread. He bypasses sin disease logic publicly and shows that covenant alignment is what matters, loyalty. He calls Levi, the non-priest Levite, of the worst possible caliber, and then says, yeah, you can't put what I have into that system. He does all of this on one page. It's fantastic. That's not an accident. So The apostolic call is a covenant reset. He's calling fishermen, not Levites, not scribes, not priestly, not temple men. This is echoing the tribal reconstitution. He's bypassing all the infrastructure. The apostles are the new tribal heads. They're the override carriers of the covenant. Peter's response is, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man." He believes he's unworthy. And Jesus says, "Yeah, you think so? From now on, you'll catch men." He's reassigning him on the spot into covenant. Then we have the roof breach protocol. The paralyzed man was lowered through the roof. This is a public rejection of the old system. No priest, no sacrifice, no temple. Direct override access. When Jesus saw their faith, their alignment, forgiveness precedes healing. That's the order of operations. The Son of Man has authority. That's back to Daniel in the Old Testament, not claiming deity. Healing confirms the registry authority. It's not just miracle to show off. And the Pharisees were all present, which means they're now under Levitical surveillance. And oh, there's a threat of retaliation. Game on. And Jesus knows it. He didn't just like, oh, Jesus isn't a victim. Like people think Jesus is a victim. Jesus is not a victim. Okay. It's like, oh, they killed Jesus. No, no. Jesus shows up, starts his ministry, and immediately starts trolling them. Okay. He's like sending letters to the IRS, like, come and take it, motherfucker. That's what he's doing. Okay. He's filing his taxes by going like, come and take it, motherfucker. He's walking in and yanking their chain.
See this? This is the kind of thing that just tickles my balls. A little cooperation and everything is pleasant as punch. You see, we really are reasonable people once you get to know us. Honest. Oh. Damn, I love this place.
He's not like, oh, I hope they don't catch me. Whoops, they caught me. I'm such a victim. That's not Jesus. He's like, yeah, I'm going to die because I got to lay down my life to pick it up again. No problem. I trust God's covenant. I'm the Davidic heir. Of course, I trust God's promise to open the kingdom. But in order to do that, I got to lay my life down. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and yank these assholes' chains and tell them what's what. That's what's happening. Jesus isn't a beta. He's not a wussy. He's not a victim. He's Davidic. So the first thing he does is see their faith, ensuring covenant alignment. And there's forgiveness, bypassing the Levitical system. Healing confirms his authority. There's massive conflict with the priesthood, which just shows that the infrastructure is bullshit. And he's got public witnesses, and the entire crowd glorifies God, not Jesus, and not the temple rituals. And interestingly, this exact sequence is shown in Acts 2. Baptism in Jesus' name is your registry alignment. Forgiveness of sins is your Levitical bypass. And you shall receive the gift of the Spirit, which is your override activation. It's the same sequence. And the actual baptism into the covenant, same order of operations. Jesus laid it out for you in Luke. So, redefining faith and forgiveness. Well, faith is dimensional loyalty, not emotional belief. It's trust in Jesus as the Davidic heir, not some abstract, feel-good hippie deity. It's an act of alignment. And for these guys, it was very public and very dangerous, especially under priesthood surveillance. They were right there. And forgiveness And Luke 5 was a registry transfer. They were moving kingdoms. It wasn't a temple ritual. Jesus is forgiving them as a Davidic overrided covenant, not as God. There's no blood sacrifice. There's no altar. It's just covenant authority in action. That's all it is. And it's beautiful. And he needs to do it to a couple churches around here. Can you imagine? Then we have our priesthood breach when Levi lost the keys right here. Well, Levi's loss of the priesthood actually began with the Hasmoneans about 150 years before Jesus. Seized the high priesthood without Zadokite lineage. The true line fled to Egypt, and we had a split. Herod's regime filled the breach and started appointing political high priests. So by Jesus's time, 200 years later, the priesthood was so corrupt and completely Babylonian. And he bypasses it entirely. He forgives sins, he heals and teaches without any priestly sanction or permission. Luke 5 is an audit in real time, trolling the priesthood. That's what he's doing. And then we've got our Dan breach. Remember, Dan migrated north in Judges 18 before David's reign, before Davidic Israel. So they settled in this little community, and they renamed it Dan, outside of Davidic Israel control. The territory was on the border of Aram, right near Mount Hermon, and this became a spiritual breach zone with lots of idolatry. Now, Chronicles does include Dan to kind of preserve this tribal unity, but Dan opted out and were never restored. They were long gone before David shows up, so they can't be restored to the Davidic kingdom if they weren't in the Davidic kingdom to begin with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they mated with lizard people and are living in the sewers of Los Angeles either. And finally, Paul is walking in the shadow of Dan. His road to Damascus passed through Dan's zone, straight from the Levitical priesthood, through Dan's breach corridor into Hadad's domain, which is our Damascus possession zone. Paul's light encounter looks a lot like Hadad. Maybe it was another one, but I personally think it was Baal Hadad, and we'll get back to that one soon in that series. It wasn't Jesus. No witnesses see Jesus. Paul never met the son of David. He preaches the Logos, not the Davidic heir. I mean, sometimes he mentions David, but he's not preaching the same Jesus. He's preaching Philos Logos mixed with Amun-Ra's solar theology and Plato's rational order. And Paul's Christ, well, that's a hybrid, not the override king. Dan's territory operated as a spiritual vacuum in the north, toggling between Israel and Aram. Damascus is Hadad's stronghold. And Paul's route went straight through the whole thing, through Dan's idolatry legacy, Aramean possession vectors, and Babylonian's infrastructure. So the priesthood says, well, Paul saw Jesus. But no, we say he met Hadad in Dan's shadow. That's what we say. So, closing the loop. You can read Luke 5 again, and please do, and laugh. Because it's really a prototype for Luke 22 through 24. Luke 5 is this tactical prototype. It's the original where we have forgiveness without temple, healing as override, and the scan of covenant faith and covenant clarity, covenant loyalty. And then he expands this later on. It's the blood of the covenant in Luke 22, speaking on the resurrection audit in 24, and the spirit transfer in Acts 2. So both sequences bypass all the Levitical infrastructure. Both are anchored in Davidic override, Davidic covenant blood. There's a reason for the blood. It's covenant blood, Davidic blood, not deity claim. So remember these things. Get out your notebook. The apostolic call is a tribal reconstitution of Davidic Israel. And that's why Dan's not there. The roof breach protocol was the public rejection of the Levitical system. The faith scan protocol, Jesus is looking for loyalty, not emotional, personal, I believe. Forgiveness override protocol, that's sin remission by Davidic covenant authority. Levi breach protocol, well, Hasmonean detonation and Herodian exposure. Dan opt-out protocol, yeah, they're pre-Davidic migration and idolatry. Dan Damascus corridor, that's the possession route that Paul took. And finally, we have our dimensional handshake in that covenant before Acts 2 comes along. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. All those in the steps, all of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.